Donald Trump cannot keep this Epstein scandal out of the news or out of Congress's purview, even with what you see, a lot of other things going on today. The House Oversight Committee probing those last Epstein days, which were under the oversight of the Trump DOJ and Bill Barr. They heard from Tova Noel. That's a former corrections officer who was crucial in the period leading up to Epstein's death. This was private testimony. Noel had already told federal investigators, as we've mentioned in some of our prior reporting, that she believes, based on her service there, that she was the last person to see Epstein alive. She says, inmate counts around 10 p.m. After that check, she and a colleague, though, didn't do the other required checks. And as we showed you in this timeline where we meticulously used prior government information and newly revealed materials from the Epstein files, there were a lot of questions on how the Trump DOJ and Bill Barr's team dealt with what were those final days, questions of negligence or worse, before Epstein was allowed to do something that inmates are not supposed to be able to do in custody, which is allegedly take their own life or die. In another protocol violation, they failed to do required overnight checks. The inmate counts every 30 minutes, which was part of the protection and the whole point of having him in this special unit. Instead, he's alone and unmonitored for 8 hours. This new law famously forced out the secret internal documents from the same probe, showing other views within the FBI about the last person near Epstein's cell. And that night, a blurry orange figure appears. The original FBI log calls it that flash of orange could possibly be an inmate. And note that careful description, because then the DOJ review of the same footage changes it to write, quote, inmates are currently on lockdown. It's possible someone is carrying inmate linen up the stairs. Was that a good faith mistake or a malicious cover-up? DOJ indicted the guards on duty that night for lying about the inmate checks that never happened. That's a big deal. It added pressure, though, for those guards to cooperate in the probe, and the DOJ later dropped those same charges. That's some of what we've been detailing. Congresswoman Stansbury, who was attending this high-stakes interview today, does describe Noel as forthcoming, saying they focused on the details of the night, some of which I touched on there, and those questions, and also discussing the loss of her job.
My takeaway is two things. One, the system once again failed survivors. It was clear incompetence and just a lack of oversight.
She does feel like her termination was unfair, and that had it not been Jeffrey Epstein, she would not have been fired.
She didn't do her job, but it seemed like people weren't doing their job generally at the MCC.
We're now joined by Democratic Congresswoman Melanie Stansbury on that critical House Oversight Committee. Welcome back. What do you think Congress learned today that's important in a series of events that we and other outlets have documented showed incompetence, failures, if not worse, from the then Trump DOJ overseeing that prison?
Well, I certainly agree with my colleague from Virginia, which is that the system over and over again has failed survivors. And, you know, this was the first time that we've heard from Ms. Noel about her firsthand account of what happened that night. She herself stated in that interview that she does believe that it was a suicide, but she did say that there were irregularities, not just that evening, but in general, that there was understaffing, that she and her colleagues had been working long hours and doubles, that they had not done the normal checks. But my takeaway from the interview was not that it was unusual per Epstein. In fact, I asked her that question. Was there anything weird about that night or unusual about how the situation was handled? And she said no. But it's clear that the system was not well managed, and that she feels, in her opinion, that she was terminated indicated that it was unfair. Had it been any other inmate, the way the system was being managed, that she would not have been fired.
Well, I mean, of all the issues here, I don't think whether the guards were sanctioned in the right way is high on anyone's priority list. They failed to do the checks. The night they failed to do the checks, he's found dead. There were, as you know, allegations of the shredded documents that have now been proven. She may or may not have had visibility on that. But again, that goes to what was going on inside the prison. There were these payments. I wanted to ask you about this. that apparently you and your colleagues asked about financial payments she got in these increments before the Epstein death. She said that was from working overtime. Did that all scan to you? And do you think that she and others could shed any light on how Epstein got special treatment? Because while if it were chess, guards are like pawns, and the accountability doesn't stop with them. But I've read the IG report. Epstein was granted these exceptions. He was using the phone call. He had a final phone call leading up to the night of his death that was on the non-recorded line, which was only allowed because a different guard, I should mention, but a guard walked him to be allowed that. I mean, there's a lot of these type of problems. So your view on those issues and her credibility today?
Yeah, I mean, I'm only here to report on the actual deposition that I sat in parts of today. I can't speak to the broader management of the prison itself. But what I can say is that she did validate that there was special treatment of Jeffrey Epstein. She said that he was given access to a CPAP, that he had special sheets, and that all indications were that he was being given special treatment inside the jail. But I specifically asked her whether she felt that there were those inside the prison, either in the management or in the guards or other prisoners who wished Jeffrey Epstein harm. And she said no. She also talked about witnessing the body as it was removed. So, there were absolutely irregularities in the prison, but I don't think that of the members and staff that were in the room, we walked away with the impression that outside of just blatant incompetence and mismanagement, that there was a larger conspiracy at hand based on her testimony. It doesn't mean that there wasn't, but based on what we witnessed in the room today. Now, with respect to these payments, what she stated in the room was that they were cash payments that she deposited herself. She said multiple times under oath that they had nothing to do with Jeffrey Epstein, but I offered her the opportunity at the end of the day to clarify the source of the payments, and she declined. So,
yeah. So, what would cash payments be? I mean, it doesn't sound like something that would be connected to normal employ.
Yeah, I mean, I think there were other parts of the interview that happened while I was not in the room in which she clarified that she was working potentially other jobs and overtime. But like I said, during the portion of the interview where I asked if she wanted to clarify for the record, she declined to do so.
Well, the reviews are in, and they're pretty much unanimous. I mean, quote, one of the single most corrupt acts in American history. Quote, corruption unparalleled in American history. Quote, the most brazen theft and abuse of taxpayer dollars by any president in American history. Quote, the largest single act of grand larceny in American history. 5 stars. Most corrupt thing ever. People are grasping for words to adequately describe the unprecedented nature and magnitude of what President Donald Trump is attempting to do right now. And this isn't even about the whole stocks fiasco we just talked about a couple minutes ago, which has also been revealed over the last few days, in which the president appears to have been buying stocks in companies right before he actively took steps as president to boost those companies. Multiple times, millions of dollars. I mean, that might be the biggest presidential corruption scandal in American history, were it not for this other thing breaking at the same time about the same U.S. president. This $1.8 billion taxpayer dollars, $1.8 billion in taxpayer funds that Donald Trump is liberating from the U.S. Treasury to pay out to his friends and allies. And look, I know there's a lot of coverage today that has described this fund. First of all, they're describing it as $1.7 billion. That's $1.8 billion. But you're also seeing a lot of descriptions, a lot of headlines about this thing, describing this fund as some kind of settlement of Trump's ridiculous lawsuit against the IRS. With all due respect to my friends in the beleaguered mainstream U.S. media, I got to say that coverage and those headlines need to be refreshed. Because while Trump might have, talked about his grievance against the IRS as a pretext to explain what he wanted to do here, the way this has worked out, it's basically totally unrelated. This pot of money this $1.8 billion is not actually meaningfully connected to Trump's supposed grievance against the IRS. His lawsuit against the IRS is gone. Trump dropped it. So this $1.8 billion, this is not like a settlement that's being overseen by a judge or something. It is just something that Donald Trump told the government he controls to give him. And so now the government he controls is going to put almost $2 billion into a fund for him at the Justice Department, and Trump's attorney general will control the money. There is no judge involved. Neither the courts nor Congress is approving any settlement or overseeing any part of this. This is just Trump getting a ton of taxpayer money to dole out. Maryland Congressman Jamie Raskin today called it, quote, nothing but a racket designed to take taxpayer dollars out of the Treasury and pour it into a huge slush fund for Trump at DOJ to hand out to his private militia of insurrectionists, rioters, and white supremacists, including those who brutally beat police officers on January 6th. Joining us now is Congressman Jamie Raskin of Maryland. He's the top Democrat on the House Judiciary Committee and a constitutional law professor. Congressman Raskin, it's really nice to see you. Thank you for making time.
Great to see you, Rachel.
Is there anything else like this in U.S. history?
Nothing like it. It's thoroughly illegal and unconstitutional. Of course, Congress never voted to set up a $1.776 billion political slush fund for the president, and we never would pass such a thing. So it's a complete violation of congressional appropriations powers. Moreover, even if Congress wanted to do such a thing, which we never would, it would be unconstitutional because the 14th Amendment says that money cannot be spent out of the federal fisc for the purposes of repaying people for insurrection or rebellion against the United States. And look, but this is his MO now with all of these political slush funds. That's what the Board of Peace is. They took $1.5 billion from the State Department. That was money that was supposed to be for disaster relief. Then he sets up this Board of Peace. He gets $1 billion from the Qataris, $1 billion from the Saudis, and so on. We don't know anything about it. Is it public, private, profit, not-for-profit, registered in America, registered in Qatar? We don't know anything about it other than Donald Trump is chairman for life. He controls all that money. So that in itself is a violation of the Foreign Government Emoluments Clause, because all those foreign states and kings and princes are giving money, and the Domestic Emoluments Clause, which says the president is limited to his salary in office and cannot derive any other money from the U.S. Treasury. But the whole administration now is just corruption, highway robbery every day.
The way that you are describing it, including your reference to the Emoluments Clause and other means by which this seems pretty illegal, even to somebody who's not a lawyer, makes me think that these things ought to be stoppable in court. I mean, who has standing to challenge the Board of Peace slush fund that you were just describing, or indeed this new one that they're trying to set up at DOJ?
Well, it won't surprise you to learn that the Roberts Court has made it extremely difficult by erecting the standing doctrine, political question doctrine, sovereign immunity, you name it, making it extremely difficult. And in addition to the fact, of course, that they've said that the president is not subject to criminal prosecution for actual crimes he commits under the auspices of his office. But at this point, everything must be tried in order to try to restore the rule of law in the country. We can't leave any potential tool just sitting on the table. We've got to try to attempt everything. But we must start by trying to get our at least 4 or 5 Republican colleagues to come over to our side to say this is utterly lawless and authoritarian, and it cannot stand. And a couple have made noises like that, but those are people who are in tough re-election races, and they might be trying to send the signal they've got a problem with it. If you've got a Republican running in your district who's saying, yes, this is problematic, ask them, will they sign their name to co-sponsor a bill to block this outrageous expropriation of the tax dollars of the people for completely political purposes, to give to Proud Boys, Oath Keepers, rioters, and insurrectionists, the people who beat up police officers. That's what this is about. It's about funding or pre-funding Donald Trump's private militia.
It strikes me that regardless of who they ultimately try to give this money to, it is interesting that they have chosen a vehicle at the Justice Department to use for this, and I think made some very good points about the fact that it's a real thing, and we should understand what the judgment fund is at the DOJ. This is a fund that's created by Congress for a specific purpose, right? It's not supposed to be a pool of money available to be stolen by anybody who feels like taking it. What is that fund for that Trump is essentially going to be plundering for this other project?
Well, it used to be that if someone successfully sued the federal government, that Congress had to vote to appropriate money to pay for the damages, to pay for their verdict. And then Congress said, we're spending half of our time just on litigation against the federal government. We'll turn it over to the Department of Justice. We'll set up this ongoing appropriation that's open, called the Judgment Fund, and that is for actual judgments, verdicts, damages levied by a court against the United States, or an honest, good faith settlement of claims that would have won in court. Okay. And of course, like everything else, we've never had a problem with this up until Donald Trump, because he sees a pot of money and the dollar signs go off in his eyes and he sees it as a political slush fund. And so now they want to convert this fund that has always been used honestly in Democratic and Republican administrations for the settlement of lawsuits or just the payment of verdicts to create this anti-weaponization fund, which is the most Orwellian title you can imagine. It's all about weaponizing the tax dollars of the American people to support Donald Trump's private militia. If these people had real viable causes of action against anybody, they would go to federal court. And the ones who have gone to federal court have lost their cases overwhelmingly. And you can't find a single case of somebody whose criminal conviction was reversed on appeal after they assaulted a police officer on January 6th or were convicted for seditious conspiracy, which means conspiracy to overthrow the government of the United States. If they had a real valid cause of action, they'd be in court getting it. But of course, Trump wants to take it out of the courts and put it under this little committee of mysterious appointees he has who are going to be exclusively responsible to him. Again, it's just a complete ripoff of the taxpayers, and everybody can see what's going on.
It's such a good point that if there was any sort of legitimate case that somebody had been victimized by some wrongdoing of the government, there are means by which that gets adjudicated. Testable constitutional means, transparent means, that we have ways of doing that. This is not the way that you do it. Congressman Jamie Raskin of Maryland, you are always very welcome here on this show anytime, but particularly when we are dealing with something of this magnitude with this many constitutional implications. Nobody better to be here but you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Rachel.
All right, we got much more news ahead tonight. Stay with us.
Well, Donald Trump is now just 27 days away from completing the 80th year of his life. And on this, the 338th day of Donald Trump's 80th year, he finally said, "I don't want to be stupid." Too late, Donald. Too late. The time to not want to be stupid is not when you are president of the United States. The time to not want to be stupid is when you are in elementary school or, at the very latest, high school. And the solution to the problem of possibly being stupid is to do your homework, something Donald Trump has never done. Donald Trump's ghost-written first book tells stories of his life growing up as a spoiled rich kid. And in his school years, there is nothing about pulling all-nighters as final exams approached. There is nothing about academic excellence or academic striving, because Donald Trump was still sane enough to know in 1987, when the book was published, that if he claimed to graduate from college summa cum laude, that kind of lie would be easily caught and exposed. There is a story proudly told in that book of Donald Trump punching one of his teachers in elementary school, which is a very strong indicator of being very, very stupid. Because it's Donald Trump telling the story about him punching a teacher. There's no reason to believe it because Donald Trump lies about everything, and he always has. But either way, actually punching a teacher in elementary school or inventing a story about punching your teacher in elementary school is a mark of grotesque stupidity. We in the news media are now struggling to keep up with two constantly expanding stories about Donald Trump, the corruption and the stupidity. And it has been impossible to really keep up with both of those stories because they are each so enormous and always expanding. There is a new facet of Trump corruption and Trump stupidity revealed every day, but at the same time, not all of the corruption is visible. And not all of the stupidity is visible, and some items in both categories just aren't big enough to make it into our coverage of the day. One small example of stupidity that you will probably hear nothing about anywhere else is the 90-day extension of the breathtakingly stupid waiver of the Jones Act that begins today. The extension begins today, making Donald Trump's waiver of the Jones Act the longest waiver in the history of that obscure law. The Jones Act requires that all cargo shipping between harbors in the United States must be carried on American-flagged ships, American crews. No foreign-flagged ships are allowed to transport anything from, say, New York Harbor to Boston Harbor or any other American port. The law is designed to protect the jobs of American maritime workers on ships and working in the ports. And Donald Trump has suspended that law because of his war in Iran, which a New York Times poll, a new New York Times poll, says 64% of Americans believe was a mistake. The poll doesn't use the word stupid mistake, it just uses the phrase the wrong decision. But surely tens of millions of Americans believe that Donald Trump's war was a stupid mistake by Donald Trump. And to compound that stupid mistake, Donald Trump actually thinks that the price of gasoline in America can somehow be made cheaper by suspending the Jones Act and allowing foreign ships to transport goods and fuel and anything else from one American port to another, even though there is absolutely no economic evidence that that could have the slightest effect on the price of gasoline anywhere in the country. Waivers to the Jones Act are rare and usually targeted at a specific emergency. President Biden waived the Jones Act in 2022 to allow a foreign flag tanker, just one, to deliver fuel to Puerto Rico after Hurricane Fiona. That's a typical use of a limited, targeted emergency use of a Jones Act waiver. Donald Trump, who claims to be the American president more concerned with American jobs than any other president in American history, now faces this objection from the Seafarers Union to his waiver of the Jones Act. Quote, America's maritime labor unions are deeply concerned about the administration's broad Jones Act waiver, which undermines our national security, weakens military readiness, and hands critical maritime work to foreign vessel operators. Or any other president waiving the Jones Act for what will now be 150 days would be a major story that would provoke emergency congressional hearings that would clearly demonstrate the utter pointlessness of such a waiver. But for Donald Trump, it's just a tiny entry in a long list of very stupid choices and broken promises about his devotion to American workers and American jobs. And the New York Times reporting on its poll showing Donald Trump at a new low in the New York Times poll of a 37% approval. Brent Klein Jr., a Republican who voted for Donald Trump in 2020 and 2024, told the New York Times, quote, he's not doing what he said he was going to do. That's my biggest frustration with him. Mr. Klein, 43, the owner of a cleaning company who lives in Branson, Missouri, described himself as very pissed off with the president's decision to attack Iran without seeking congressional approval. I just want my family to live a good, healthy life, he added, and to not have to constantly pay more and more for food products and stuff. Speaking of history, Donald Trump is the first president in history to publicly promise to commit war crimes, which is in and of itself a war crime. He did it yesterday on social media, saying, quote, for Iran, The clock is ticking, and they better get moving fast, or there won't be anything left of them. Time is of the essence, exclamation point. The world has come to ignore Donald Trump's written threats of war crimes. The President of the United States yesterday said there won't be anything left of them. That would mean that Donald Trump was planning to kill every child in Iran, every baby, every pregnant woman, every person in the country. And not one person in the world took Donald Trump seriously when he said that, because he has said it too many times before, more times than the world can keep track of. And the world knows, as the Iranian regime surely knows, that Donald Trump wasn't going to do it, that it was just another empty threat from Donald Trump. And sure enough, today on social media, Donald Trump said that he had decided, quote, to hold off our planned military attack on the Islamic Republic of Iran, which was scheduled for tomorrow. He claimed that the dictators of other countries in the region urged him not to commit any war crimes against Iran in the hope of concluding a peace agreement with Iran. And Donald Trump said, quote, this deal will include, importantly, no nuclear weapons for Iran, exclamation point. In other words, it will include exactly what was included in the deal President Obama and 5 other countries negotiated with Iran, in which Iran promised not to make nuclear weapons, not to pursue nuclear weapons in any way. Donald Trump ripped up that deal, negotiated by Secretary of State John Kerry. In his first term as president, Donald Trump just dropped out of the deal. Donald Trump withdrew the United States from an agreement in which Iran said in writing, quote, under no circumstances will Iran ever seek, develop, or acquire any nuclear weapons. And now Donald Trump has gone to war to desperately attempt to get Iran to put that same sentence in writing again for him. And Iran is refusing to do so. At 5:37 p.m. today, Donald Trump said, quote,
we were getting ready to do a very major attack tomorrow. I've put it off for a little while, hopefully maybe forever, but possibly for a little while, because we've had very big discussions with Iran, and we'll see what they amount to. I was asked by Saudi Arabia, Qatar, UAE, and some others if we could put it off for 2 or 3 days, a short period of time, because they think that they are getting very close to making a deal. And if we can do that where there's no nuclear weapon going into the hands of Iran, I think, and if they're satisfied, we will be probably satisfied also.
That's the man who said, I don't want to be stupid. So there is Donald Trump now saying the negotiations are up to Iran's neighbors. And if they're satisfied, then we will be satisfied. That's not what President Obama did. That's not what John Kerry did. Donald Trump has found an even weaker negotiating position with Iran. The Iranian regime knows just how opposed to Donald Trump's war the American people are. And that came up today in a Trump phone interview with the New York Post. The New York Post reports, quote, questioned about regional source claims that Iran is attempting to wait out Washington on both the nuclear issue and reopening the Strait of Hormuz. Trump said he hadn't heard that. I'm not hearing anything, he said. I can't talk to you about it. It's a negotiation. I don't want to be stupid. There is no reason to believe Donald Trump is planning a major attack on Iran, knowing that the American people are opposed to that. How stupid do you have to be to send your Secretary of Defense to Kentucky for a campaign event when you want Iran to think that the Defense Secretary is planning the next big attack on Iran? And Donald Trump says today, I don't want to be stupid, which is exactly the same as Donald Trump saying with his 80th birthday approaching, I don't want to be old.
I want to bring in MS Now's Jake Traylor at the White House. Peter Baker is chief White House correspondent for the New York Times and an MS Now contributor. And Stuart Stevens is senior advisor to the Lincoln Project and was chief strategist for Mitt Romney's 2012 campaign. Good to have all of you here. Peter, the Times polling, most of which was done after Trump made his remarks about Americans' financial struggles, show overwhelmingly that people want him focused on them. They're clearly unhappy, he isn't. Is there nothing that pushes him to think that he's in a losing proposition?
Well, it's remarkable because these numbers show how weak he is, even on areas that he has traditionally been strong, right? A lot of Americans might not like all of his policies, but many of them did like for a while, at least, his policies on immigration. A lot of them did like for a while his policies on the economy. They believed his, pitch that he was the great economic president and that he would bring back jobs and get rid of inflation and do all these things. And the polls show that most Americans don't buy that anymore. That even Republicans, many Republicans who voted for him, like that caller, have lost faith that he really is focused on their issues. Inflation is higher than it was when he came into office. Job growth has plummeted since he took office. And obviously the price of gas and other things are causing a lot of hardship at home. And you see these numbers that reflect not just Democrats, independents who already were predisposed not to like him, but a lot of Republicans, not all, not a majority even necessarily, but a lot of Republicans have lost faith.
And Stuart, President Trump actually doubled down on Friday and said his statement about not focusing on Americans' economic concerns again was a perfect statement, and he'd say it again. But among independents, only 17% describe economic conditions as excellent or good. Just 25% think the country is on the right track. So if you're in a competitive race and you're a Republican, at what point do you conclude that sticking with Trump is more dangerous to your political career than breaking away?
Yeah, it's fascinating because you have these two dynamics. You have sort of the non-hardcore Republican world, and we're seeing people like Cassidy losing. Cornyn's probably going to lose. This has triumphed as, the power that Trump has over the party. And when Lindsey Graham went out this weekend and said Donald Trump is the Republican Party. Well, I wrote a book called It Was All a Lie, How the Republican Party Became Donald Trump. It is Donald Trump. There is no anti-Trump party. But you have the rest of the world. And you look at these numbers, and it's just as clear as can be. He's losing on every issue. And at a certain point in politics, you need to be for something that people like. And he's just not. And the classic way to correct here is that standard play. You go, we've made mistakes, but we've listened, and we're going to change. And Americans are predisposed to give people a second chance, but you kind of have to show that you're trying. You kind of have to go to Betty Ford to say, okay, I'm going to quit. You can't just stay at the bar and say, I'm going to quit. And Trump's incapable of doing that. And so he doubles down, like you say. And this places Republican candidates in this box that really is unique in American modern politics because you've never had a leader of a party who will punish those, even if it hurts himself, that try to say what they need to say to get elected. So it's a real problem for Republicans.
And Peter, the last line in today's article that broke down the poll said something I thought was fascinating. It says, in the polling era, there are no examples of the president's party retaining the White House when the president's approval rating is under 40%. Again, Trump's is at 37. And then it said, quote, more often, the election is a rout. Now, it's obviously early, but does the math add up for the Republican Party if they're hoping to retain power, not just in 2026, but potentially even in 28?
Yeah, I mean, obviously a lot can happen between now and 2028. We'll see. But it's really hard to dig out of a hole once you're in it, to Stuart's point. With the general public, when they have made up their minds, it's really hard to give them new information to reevaluate their position, especially if you're not going to do what Stuart was just talking about, which is to, offer some sort of a mea culpa and a change plan. At this point, they know who Donald Trump is. They have known him now for 10 years on the political stage. It's not easy to reinvent your image to gain back the support that you've lost. Now, we'll see if the economy were suddenly to surge, if the war were over. Obviously, you have to allow for that possibility, and that could change the political dynamics. But there are Republicans right now who are, as you say, looking at 2028 with a real dark vision right now, because it's not, historically likely to be able to hold on to the White House in a time where the incumbent is so unpopular. That's what Joe Biden and Kamala Harris discovered in some ways. Kamala Harris was the new figure, but she couldn't distance herself from the incumbent, who had lost a lot of support among the public. And whoever's running on, Trump's record here, whether it be J.D. Vance or Marco Rubio or somebody else, they're going to have to own and explain that record. And that's going to be a challenge, it looks like, according to today's polls.
Jake, are you getting any sense that the White House is feeling the pressure from these polls?
Yeah, I mean, look, Chris, they are feeling it, but they're remedying it with another poll. That's the voting polls. I was just talking with a White House official who's familiar with the White House's campaign strategy in the midterms, and they said that as these approval ratings really just show the president in the tank right now, that his focus has been on some of these primary elections where one by one he's been ticking off any challenger within his own Republican Party. The latest example of that, of course, was Bill Cassidy over the weekend. The most recent future look at that is Thomas Massie in Kentucky. This White House official told me that's the polling that the president's been looking at right now, is his continued victories within the Republican Party, not as much of a focus on the general. And whenever we talk about this, too, I was just speaking with another White House official who continues to make the argument that this is short term, that there is a plan to pivot. Of course, the ongoing war with Iran, as it goes much farther than the White House initially predicted, is the issue they're facing, as Peter mentioned there, that they're continuing to dig a hole here. As we do look at some of this polling, this new New York Times polling, job as president, 37% approval rating for the president. When it comes to his handling of the economy, 33% approving. Cost of living, 28% approval. Whenever I talk to White House officials about these just really stark numbers, they say the president is focused on the primaries right now. In terms of their political strategy and outlook, they are intending, in terms of midterm strategy, to focus on the big, beautiful bill. That is what they say is going to be the going home, send home message, is to focus on the big, beautiful bill, tax cuts that come out of that. The problem, of course, though, is that what leaks into that is the way that Americans are feeling about the economy, feeling at the gas pump and the grocery stores right now. And despite the focused desire to be on the big, beautiful bill, it's getting crowded out by the star of the show, which is the affordability crisis in the country right now.
Yeah, Stuart, at the same time, we're seeing Democrats having a tough time turning all of this dissatisfaction into clear support. Look at the New York Times poll. 70% of voters are dissatisfied with the Democratic Party. That includes 44% of Democrats themselves. Should that at least temper their expectations for November?
Yeah, if I ran the Democratic Party, I would just shut up about the Democratic Party. I think we've had two interesting tests in November with Virginia governor's race and New Jersey governor's race. So the Democratic numbers were in the party numbers were in the tank, and the candidates won by 10 points, which in those states is a really big margin. I've helped elect Republican governors in both those states. I don't think anybody likes any of our parties, which is why independents are the fastest growing group. So this idea that you're going to defend the party is an unnecessary burden. This is the most simple race that you can imagine. It's like you've got a choice. If you like the way the things are going, fine, vote for Republican. If you don't, here's another chance. Let's send them a message. And Democrats need to not make that a speed bump sort of that you have to get over. Well, that means I've got to be for X or Y. Enough to say, send them a message, we're an alternative. And, every election we've had since 2016 has been a change election. When Trump won, it was a change election. When Biden won, it was a change election. When Trump won again, it was a change election. And the number that we don't talk enough about is the right track of the country. And it's about 25% now. And that question, do you think the country's going the right track or wrong track? And an incumbent party, just as it's never won when the president's approval was under 40, but an even more stark number is incumbent parties never won when the right track was under 45. And look, it's at 25 now. That's a real problem. And it's not a problem that's going to solve itself very easily.
Peter, it is always a difficult proposition to try to figure out what's in President Trump's heads. But the posts yesterday that we showed, including things we haven't seen before, like the AI stuff with the alien, the Wall Street Journal recently said his posts over the course of many months are a window into Trump's mind. If that is the case, what do you see?
Well, I mean, I think, look, he has always been somebody who is unconventional, let's say, unorthodox. He likes to stroke his own ego with these images of him as a Jedi warrior, as James Bond, even as the Pope, right, as Jesus Christ, which got him in trouble just a few weeks ago. He favors social media conspiracy theories. He favors outright, falsehoods on these social media posts. He seems absorbed with his own image and his own name. Why is he putting his name on buildings? And he's putting his signature on the currency. He's putting his face on national park tickets and on coins. Everything for Donald Trump is about Donald Trump at this point. And I think this speaks to your question about the polls, because a lot of people out there who like Donald Trump want him to focus on them and their issues, not on him and his satisfaction. And we'll talk about this compensation fund he's about to start, where he's going to pay his supporters using taxpayer money soon. But the image he is sending with these posts, the message he is sending with his political priorities, is often to many voters about himself rather than about them.
Here with us now is Dr. Celine Gounder, the editor-at-large for public health at KFF Health News and an infectious disease specialist. I'll note she spent 2 months working in West Africa during the 2014 and 2016 Ebola outbreak. Doctor, thanks so much for joining us. Let's pick up where we just left off with Britt, and she reported a bit on how this is an unusual strain, right? Talk to us more about what makes this strain particularly dangerous and different from others.
So this is Bundibugyo. What makes us different, it's 40% different genetically speaking from the kind of Ebola that we saw, the species of Ebola that we saw in West Africa. Unlike that species, we have no vaccines, we have no specific treatments. You're really just looking at supportive care. So things like IV fluids, that's really a lot of the mainstay is trying to rehydrate people. We are also dealing, as Dr. Ramoyne said, with a very difficult situation as compared to that last outbreak. That last outbreak was the biggest outbreak we'd ever seen of Ebola. People probably still remember the headlines. So not only are we dealing with Ebola in urban settings, migrant workers with cross-border spread, we're also dealing with armed militia groups in the area. So that makes it more difficult for healthcare workers to get in there, refugee camps. The size of this outbreak would indicate that this has been festering for months. You've also had the collapse of the local healthcare system, in part related to the armed militants, but also related to the dismantling of USAID. They have shortages of personal protective equipment, which means that the risk to healthcare workers is going to be that much higher, more likely to get infected. So there's a whole lot of factors here working against us.
I mean, to reach this qualification or declaration of a world health emergency, what does that mean? And have we seen an effective global response to these types of declarations in the past?
Well, yes, it does help mobilize resources generally to make a declaration like this. And for the Director General of the World Health Organization to make this declaration even before a meeting to discuss whether to do this or not speaks to the urgency of the situation and to how large this outbreak already is.
The first cases were reported in Mongwalu, a mining town, a health zone in the DRC. And the World Health Organization has now confirmed cases in Uganda as well. How big is this threat to areas beyond these two countries?
Well, there's probably been wider spread than we even realize. If you go back and look at early signals, there probably were signals going back to March. And so that means that a lot of people have been exposed by this point, in particular healthcare workers. That's where we tend to see a lot of the early infections. And then also family members who might be caring for sick people at home, burials and the rites around burials are another major risk factor. So we're probably just seeing the tip of the iceberg. Now, in terms of spread elsewhere, we've already seen spread to Uganda. We're very concerned about spread to South Sudan, where you have large refugee populations. Kampala, which is the capital of Uganda, is where those couple cases were seen in Uganda. And that's a major travel hub for Southern Africa.
The U.S. Agency for International Development, or USAID, has played a big role in containing the previous Ebola outbreaks, like 2014 to 2016, which you were a big part of as well. But last year, the Trump administration shuttered USAID. What's the impact of that move, especially as it relates to this new outbreak?
Yeah, so USAID funds the boots on the ground response. So they fund the people, the protective equipment, the supplies that you need for a response like this. And even before this outbreak, I spoke to a researcher over the weekend who'd been looking at what have been the impacts of USAID pulling out on health in the region. It's estimated that over 300,000 people have died in this region as a result. So things like maternal death, tuberculosis, malaria, and so on. And so, we were already seeing impacts even before this. Now you're not going to have the people who need to be responding. Their health system is collapsing even before this. And their pharmaceutical and the supply chain is also in big trouble. So it's going to be very difficult to respond as quickly as we would like.
Quickly, if you will, how concerned should Americans be?
Well, to put this in perspective, so when I heard about COVID in late 2019, early 2020, I was terrified. Hantavirus, I am concerned for the people who are on the cruise ship. I am not concerned about it, an epidemic or pandemic. This has me very concerned.
And why is that?
Well, we've already seen the fact that this Ebola outbreak is larger at the time of detection than is normally the case. So it's been brewing for a while. I think this has the potential to be bigger than that 2014, 2016 epidemic in West Africa. I think based on the fact that it's all the same risk factors plus more, plus the U.S. not being able to respond to help contain this in the way it used to be, I think this is really very, very concerning.
We will be following closely. Dr. Celine Gounder, thank you.